everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. My name is Whitney. If you're a new viewer, thank you so much for joining us. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. I am here to talk to you about my latest finished object. You can probably guess that it is what I'm wearing. I am going to be doing a pattern review today of a size inclusive pattern, and I'm very excited to talk to you about this. It's something that I've been working on for a while now. I know I've been mentioning in my last few videos that I've been working on a project that is a long project because it was made with fingering yarn, which I don't use very often because it takes a long time to knit with, but this was something that I just couldn't miss, so I had to knit it. But first, let's start with the mug of the episode. And you'll learn in a little bit why I just had to choose my Jane Austen mug as this mug of the episode. And this is a special mug to me. It was given to me when I moved on from a job, and this was a gift from my coworkers. And of course, it's right up my alley because it's all quotes from Jane Austen's novels. If you hear some clicking in the background, that's Rooster. He's just going over to his bed now. Hopefully he'll settle down, but if you hear clicking, I apologize. So today I'm drinking some toasted almond tea from a local tea store here in Nova Scotia. It is called World Tea House. Now this flavor is usually only available around the holidays, but they did a special batch recently and I was able to snag myself some of it. So cheers. It's so yummy. So, before I get into my pattern review, this is the Elizabeth Bennet Linen Tee designed by Gabrielle Everett, who's also known as Gabby's Goodies on Instagram. And before I get right into my pattern review, I think it's important that I address that I am a Jane Austen fan. I have been a fan of hers since I was young. My mom and I actually watched the 1995 BBC miniseries with Colin Firth and Jennifer Ely when it used to come on cable every Saturday morning, one episode at a time. And it was my first exposure to Jane Austen, and I was hooked. I loved it from the first minute that I saw it. Of course, when I was younger, I loved it mainly because it was a way that I got to connect with my mom and we got to spend time together watching that show every Saturday for the hour that it was on, because it's a 6-hour miniseries and they only showed one episode at a time. But after that, I got more into Jane Austen when I went to university. I did a bachelor's of English and Film Studies, and sorry, a car just went by. So I did my bachelor's in English and Film Studies, and I, of course, was exposed to Jane Austen, and I read some of her books for the first time, and I just loved them. I have read all of them now, but up until recently, I would have said I've read all of them except Emma, because Emma was one that I kept putting off because it was really long, and I just really don't like the character of Emma, so it took me a while to actually sit myself down and read it and finish reading all of her books. But I'm not here to talk about Emma. I'm here to talk about Lizzie Bennet, my favorite of all of Austen's heroines. Of course, she's the favorite of many because Pride and Prejudice is most people's favorite book. It's mine. I know, typical Jane Austen fan, always going for the most popular, but I just really love it. It's such a great story. It is an easy read compared to some of her other books. I find that Pride and Prejudice is the most accessible as a 19th century novel. It's not as bogged down with heavy descriptions. There's more dialogue between characters, and there's just, it's an easier story to get into because it's a pretty straightforward romance. Except that it's not a romance, it's a social commentary, which most people don't know is what Jane Austen wrote about. Anyway, moving on. It's safe to say that I am a big Jane Austen fan. I have all of her novels. I also collect copies of Pride and Prejudice. I have seen almost every version of Pride and Prejudice. I've seen almost every Jane Austen adaptation, and I have a lot of Jane Austen fandom items. So, like I mentioned, my love of Jane Austen started when I was a kid, then I got more into it when I was in my bachelor's, and then I chose to do a master's of film studies. Don't recommend, it's not great if you're trying to find a job, but I did one. And my focus for my thesis was adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, and I focused on 3 adaptations. I focused on the 1995 miniseries with Colin Firth and Jennifer Ely, the 2005 film with Keira Knightley and Matthew Macfadyen, and probably one of the coolest adaptations I've ever seen of anything, which is the Elizabeth Bennet Diaries, which was a YouTube series that came out in 2012. And it started off as a series on YouTube, and all of the characters had their own social media accounts, and it even spawned 2 books, which I haven't read them yet, but they're gonna be really fun to read. I just wanted to wait until it was further away from my mind so that I could just relive the Elizabeth Bennet Diaries all over again, because it's such a fun series. If you are at all interested in reading an academic 100-page paper about adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, I will put the link to my thesis down below. If you feel inclined to read it, do not feel that you have to. It's not that interesting. But for those of you who are probably going to ask me about it, I will put the link below for you. Moving on to the knitting, which is why you're here. The Elizabeth Bennet Linen Tee. I am so happy with this pattern. It was a test knit, and I'll talk a little bit more about test knits later on in the video, but for right now I'm going to talk about this pattern specifically. I had first put this pattern, I'd bought the pattern on Ravelry years ago when it only had 2 sizes. It had small, medium, and it had large. And I thought to myself, well, that's not going to fit me, but if I use bigger yarn, I might be able to get away with it and just fudge my numbers and everything. So I did that. I just put it away on my Ravelry library, and I just didn't do anything with it because I just wasn't in the right headspace to do some extra math for a pattern. And I just sat there forgotten. And 2 months ago, I was just scrolling around Ravelry looking at different things, and I happened upon that pattern page, and it said that the designer has extended the sizes and she was looking for test knitters. And I thought to myself, she's giving 2 months to make it. That sounds like something I could do. I know I like the pattern. I know I love Jane Austen. So I contacted the designer and I said, hi, I'm interested in testing this pattern. Do you have anyone already set up for the size that I wanted to test? And she was thrilled to have me because she actually didn't have any plus size testers yet. And as far as I know, I don't think she got any other plus size testers. So I was the only one, which is too bad because it's a really, really cute pattern. Anyway, I signed up to test knit. And originally I was just going to use some yarn for my stash because I'm always looking for an opportunity to use stash yarn, trying to whittle that down a bit. But because it was a flowy tee, I knew I wanted a plant-based fiber so that I would have that nice drape. But I didn't have anything in my stash that worked. The one yarn that I had picked out, I did a swatch with it and it just was way too big for the gauge that I needed for this pattern. So I went to my local yarn store, one of my local yarn stores, and I said to the shop owner, I'm looking for some linen yarn because I knew that the designer had designed this with linen in mind as the fiber that you use. And I thought, because it's a test knit, I should probably use the type of yarn that she used. And the owner of the shop got me all kinds of different linen yarns, and most of them were twisted. Most of them were plied. And because linen has such a short fiber length, a plied yarn has a lot of bits sticking out, and that's what makes it really rough. So I didn't really like most of the ones that I found just on the shelf. But then the shop owner remembered that she had a chained linen, that she only had 1 or 2 that were out, but she had more downstairs in sweater quantities. So she brought me one of those, which is right here. And this is a Japanese yarn, so I'm going to butcher the title, and I do apologize about that. This is Shibui Knits, and this is their yarn Reed, which is 100% linen in a chained construction. And the colorway is called Field. When the shop owner brought me up the colors that she had of Shibui in sweater quantities, she only had 3 colors that were enough for what I needed for the project. I needed 5 of their 50-gram balls. And the 3 colors were black, which I've already knit with black yarn. We'll never do it again. I've crossed that box. No black. That's not gonna happen. And then she had sort of like a steel charcoal gray. Not my first choice. It's not a great color for me. It washes me out. And I also I find it kind of dark and dingy, and it just doesn't have a lot of life to it. But that's my choice. That's my opinion. And then the 3rd color that she showed me was this, which is sort of like a dark olive green. So I did hold the gray and the green up to my face, and I went towards the front of the store where they had a window, and I looked at it with natural light. The gray honestly didn't look that bad, but the green definitely stood out as the better color for me. So I ended up buying the green yarn. And I am extremely happy with this yarn. I have never knit with linen yarn before. This was my very first time. And I was warned ahead of time that linen can feel quite rough, and it's definitely something that it's not gonna be like the soft merino wool or the alpaca, or even just like a really nice type of wool. You're never gonna get that same softness that you will with linen because of the nature of the linen yarn. It's made from the pulp of a flax plant. It's naturally kind of rough. But I was very surprised by how much I liked this yarn. As you can see, it has amazing drape. This is so nice and flowy. It's a really great yarn for that, complete lack of elasticity. There is no stretch to this whatsoever. But it just hangs so nicely on the body. And it's really not that rough on your hands. Obviously, it doesn't feel like those soft wools, but it's definitely something that I can wear next to my skin and not have any issues with. And I think that's down to the chained construction of the yarn. So back to the pattern. This is a bottom-up t-shirt design intended to be worn with positive ease. I test knitted the size 2XL, which is a 56-inch bust. Now I'm roughly a 48 to 50-inch bust, closer to a 50 right now. And I knew I wanted about 6 inches of positive ease. I didn't want too much because I didn't want it to look like it was just a potato sack hanging off my body. But I didn't want it to be too snug because I didn't want it to melt into the shape of my body and like really hug my body. I wanted it to have that looseness to it. So the 2XL was the perfect size for me. And I have got to say, it suits me so nicely. I am gonna pop some pictures and some videos into this episode because you really don't get a good idea of what it looks like on my body just sitting here. But my camera is a little too close and I can't really show it to you very well just by standing up right here. So I'm gonna insert some videos for you. And I just love how it hangs so nicely, but it also hugs my curves a little bit. So it's just so perfectly fitted to my body. And I am just blown away by how wonderful this top fits. And I'm so grateful that Gabrielle Everett took the time to update her pattern that was only intended for 2 sizes and make it much more size inclusive. So the pattern is now available from size extra small all the way up to size 4XL. And I'll put a little bar here down below telling you the range of bust inches. Size inclusivity is a really big topic in the knitting community right now, and it just makes me so happy that a designer took the time to update one of her older patterns so that someone my size can make it. It really makes me feel like she cares about size inclusivity. She cares about designing items that are available for a wide variety of people to make and to wear. And obviously she did her homework, because this fits me perfectly. And I'm a completely different body type than she is. And originally she designed her pattern mainly for her own size and one other size. So it's just, it's very heartwarming, and it makes me so happy as a knitter to have a designer think about what would work for my body and for me as well. So just very, very happy about that. I'm just gonna take a quick drink. So this is a paid for pattern, so I'm not going to talk too much in depth about it, but I am just going to gush more and more about it because, as I said, I'm just so excited about this pattern. It's mainly a stockinette body, but I'm going to pop in a picture right here to show you the detail on the back, because that is the sweet spot of this pattern. It's this beautiful eyelet design that goes up the back, and mine meets in the middle, but not all of them do. It depends on how much you need to knit, because it's a traveling lace. So if you reach the length that you need before your lace meets, your lace won't meet. Because Gabrielle's version is of a smaller size, she didn't have to knit as much, so her lace does not meet. Mine had to be knit a little longer because that was my size. So my lace met. The details of this pattern are what I like about it the most, because Gabrielle's been very thoughtful about how things will work. So even something as simple as having a beautiful seed stitch border, which I don't think I've done that for any top or sweater. I usually do a ribbing, but that doesn't really suit this design. Neither does like an I-cord cast on, to start with that to keep it from rolling. And you couldn't just start with your stockinette, because that's just gonna roll and it's gonna look unfinished. This is really, really classy. And it's not something that I would have thought of doing for a pattern, but it's really nice. It's knit from the bottom up, which means that you really don't get an idea of what it looks like on you until you're pretty much done. So that's my only drawback about this pattern, but that's personal preference. I prefer to knit top down so that I can try things on as I go, and I can get an idea of how it looks on my body and adjust things as I go. Versus when you go bottom up, if something doesn't work, you kind of won't know until you're almost at the end, which is a little nerve-wracking, especially when it's a test knit, but Gabrielle did an amazing job. It worked out perfectly. It fits me perfectly. I had everything the way it was supposed to go. So as you can see, it's like a little t-shirt style. Oops, there's a hair on my shoulder. And I'm very happy with this design. It's something that I'm gonna get so much wear out of. So it's funny, I finished this top right on the first day of fall. And it's a summer knit, really, because linen yarn is a warm weather material because it keeps you very cool. And I don't really need that going into fall here in Nova Scotia. It's quite cool here in the fall. But I just love this top. I've already worn it 3 or 4 times since finishing it on Monday of this week, and I'm recording on a Saturday. So it's definitely something that I'm gonna wear all the time. I love just throwing it on. I do have to wear a tank top underneath because it is a little see-through, but I don't mind wearing a tank top underneath because then you really get to see the eyelets on the back and it really makes them stand out. It's so pretty. But I've already got several outfit ideas in mind, And I'm going to share some of those outfits on my Instagram. So if you follow me on Instagram, keep an eye out for that. If you don't follow me on Instagram, head on over there. Check it out. I'm saying a lot. I'm going to have a drink. So I don't have many drawbacks about this pattern. First of all, the bottom-up construction, which I just mentioned a minute ago. And the only other thing that I had a little drawback about with this pattern was that it took me a while to really start to understand how the lace sections worked. And that was my own hubris, because I thought, oh, I've done lace. I know how to do that. That won't take me too long. I can figure that out. And I made the mistake of thinking that I had understood the pattern faster than I actually did. And I got confused. And so there are some little boo-boos at the bottom of my lace sections. You don't notice them at all, so I'm not concerned. I'm not going back to fix them. Definitely not now, because it's done. But I do have one or two sections higher up where I did make some mistakes, but I didn't notice until it was a few rows later on, and I thought, fingering weight just takes so long for me to knit. It takes so long to tink back on. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to move on, because they're small mistakes, so you don't really notice them. And really, the little mistakes that you find in an item that you've made yourself is just a mark of it being handmade. It makes it unique and special to you. I'm also one of those people that I have a funny way of knitting where I kind of hope that I make a little mistake early on in my knitting, because I feel like that's sort of a talisman against making a big mistake later on. And I think it just is my way of telling my brain, you can relax now, you've made your mistake, you can focus more, you'll be fine. Versus when I try and make things absolutely perfectly, I end up almost getting too wrapped up in what I'm doing, and then I make a really big mistake, and I get very overwhelmed by the fact that I made a big mistake, and then I have to fix it and everything. This happened to me, the last time this happened to me, I was working on a brioche shawl, which I'll pop a picture of right here. And luckily, when I made the brioche shawl, it was recommended to me to use lifelines. I will tell you one thing, if you ever knit brioche, it's a beautiful, beautiful stitch. It's very relaxing once you get the hang of it, because it is a really repetitive stitch, but use lifelines. Because if you do the wrong row of instructions, it's very noticeable, and you have to go back and fix it. And brioche is not an easy stitch to tink back. So I was working on this shawl, and I was putting in my lifelines every so many rows, and I got too cocky and too comfortable, but I was also focusing on the fact that I wanted to make this shawl perfectly, and I accidentally did the wrong row. And it was so obvious that I did the wrong row. But luckily I had a lifeline, I went back to it, and then I kept going, and it was fine for the rest of the project. But it just made me realize that if I don't make a little mistake early on, I usually make a big glaring mistake later on. So that's sort of like my ethos about when I do my knitting, is it's okay if I make a little mistake, no one will notice it. So for example, I have little mistakes in this project. No one will notice them except me. And that's what counts. Will I make this pattern again? That's a good question. I had a knit date earlier today with my best knitting friend, or my BKF, and she asked me that. She said, I have two questions for you. Will you knit this again, and will you use this yarn again? So I'll answer the second question first. Yes, 100% yes. Or maybe I should say, yes, 1,000 times yes. Little Pride and Prejudice nugget there for you. Yes, I will definitely use this yarn again. I loved using it. It is a little on the pricier side. It's $20 per 50 gram skein of yarn, or at least that was the price in my local yarn store. And I needed 5 skeins of it. I didn't use all 5, as you can see. I still have quite a healthy ball left. So this top wasn't super cheap to knit, but that's okay. It is worth it to me to have this really wonderful yarn, to have this great drape and all that jazz. So I'll definitely use the yarn again. And when it comes to the top, I think I will knit this again. It's definitely something that I need to concentrate a lot on, and it does take me a long time. And like I mentioned in my very first podcast episode, when I did the Radiate sweater, I usually don't knit the same pattern twice. I've only done that once or twice with garments. I do it with hats all the time because I have my favorite hat pattern that I like to make. But in general, I usually only make a garment pattern once and then that's it. I have my absolute favorites that I might go back to at some point, but I just haven't yet. This will be one of those patterns. I'll put it in my list of patterns that I really loved, patterns that I get a lot of wear out of, but not something that I'm gonna rush to make right away. And that's just because it is a very time-consuming pattern for me, because I am a very slow knitter. It's made with fingering yarn. It did take me a while to really understand the way that the eyelet instructions worked. But in the end, you can see it's absolutely worth it. It's a beautiful t-shirt. It's one that I'm gonna get so much wear out of. So it's probably gonna be worth my while to make another one, especially in a couple of years when maybe this one is looking like it needs a companion to take the load off of its shoulders because I'm wearing it all the time. But yeah, I probably will make it again. I would like to see it in a different color. This is a color I don't have a lot of in my wardrobe, and I'm super happy I went with it. I actually chose it because it matches the color scheme of Keira Knightley's costumes in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. And that is definitely the frame of reference that I went with when I was taking my pictures and my videos and my reels of this finished top. And even though it was super early in the morning, my boyfriend was really game and he came with me and helped me take my pictures and videos, and love him for doing that. Really, really appreciative. So that was kind of how I framed that, and that's why I chose this color. But I think I would want it in maybe a light color. I think it would look really, really nice as a white or an off-white. And I don't have that in my wardrobe really. I have, I have a white t-shirt, I have a white blouse for work, but I don't have many white items, and I think this would be a really great piece to have in white. Once I post my outfit reel of all the different ways that I will wear this top, I'll get a better idea of how I can wear it if it was a different color with other items in my wardrobe. So that would be how I would remake this one. And I would be better about paying attention to the instructions for the lace section so that I don't maybe have as many boo-boos as I did with this one. So that is my review of the Elizabeth Bennet Linen Tee. So let's talk a little bit more about test knits. I am an infrequent test knitter. I don't do it all the time. I'm very selective of what I choose to test knit because it's not really a type of knitting that I enjoy to do. But test knitters are really, really important, especially for a designer that wants to do size inclusive designs. It's really hard to design something for multiple sizes, but then not have anyone to test it to make sure that it actually works out. So it is very important for knitters to test knit designs. And I'm not really one of those knitters. I'm very choosy about what I decide to test knit. And that's because, I think I mentioned it in my first video, I really don't like deadline knitting. It's something that I find is very stressful because I always have to work on that project. I feel guilty if I take a break. And if I choose to not work on it, I'm purposely letting down the designer, because if I don't produce my item by the deadline of the test knit, that looks bad on me because it means that I didn't hold up my end of the bargain with the designer. Now, Some designers will offer different incentives for doing test knitting. The standard of what you are offered is you get the pattern for free. A lot of designers will go above that though. They'll give you the design that you test knitted for free, and they'll give you one other design of theirs for free. That's usually what designers offer, but there is no standard for what they need to offer, which is fine. I don't test knit for the perks. I test knit because it's a design that I love, and I have the brain power to focus really hard on the design, to give the designer feedback, to help them make their design as accessible as possible, to make it as easy to follow as possible, to make sure there's no grammatical errors, no number errors, nothing like that. So that's why I test knit. I test knit to help out a designer. Obviously, there is sort of the special feeling you get when knowing that you're testing a design that no one else has access to. So you feel like you're in a very exclusive club. But in general, I test knit to help a designer. And one of the other reasons why I'm very choosy about what I decide to test knit is because I've had bad experiences test knitting. I had one experience recently. I don't want to talk about who designed it or what it was, because I don't want to bring negative attention to anyone. That's just not who I am. But I just didn't have a really great time test knitting the piece, and it really didn't flatter my body at all. I was really, it made me really upset knowing that I was making something that in the end I wasn't even going to wear. I ripped it out afterwards, which is unfortunate because I spent many hours. I spent months working on something only to not have anything wearable at the end, which is a really, really bad feeling when you're knitting. It just made finishing the item feel really sad, because why am I bothering? I'm bothering because I have an agreement with a designer to finish my test knit, to give my feedback, and so on. And that test knitting experience, I was able to give a lot of feedback to the designer, which the designer really appreciated, and which I think improved the design by the end of it. I was the only plus size tester for the designer as well, which probably also made me feel like I was pretty alone in the test knitting experience, because for one thing, it was taking me a lot longer than everybody else, so I was seeing all of these finished products and I was still lagging behind. And then when I did finish mine, I was taking my photos and I just felt very uncomfortable because I'm wearing something that is not something I would actually wear. In fact, mine had 2 different style sleeves because the designer and I went back and forth and we adjusted things for the second sleeve. Anyway, getting ahead of myself. So I am very choosy with what I decide to test knit. And I decided to test knit this piece because I love Pride and Prejudice. It's one of my favorite books. I love Lizzie Bennet. I had already had access to the pattern with its original sizing, so I had an idea of how it worked. And most importantly, the designer gave significant time to knit the tee, which, if you're part of the size inclusive discussion in the knitting community, specifically with Denise of the Cajun Crafter, you'll know that there's another conversation happening within that about size inclusive test knitting. And Denise has started a conversation about what the needs are of a plus size tester, and addressing the fact that a lot of designers say that they can't find plus size testers, and bridging the gap between those designers and those testers to understand where the miscommunication is happening and why they're not joining together. Because it helps everyone when a designer makes size inclusive items. It also helps everyone when those size inclusive sizes are tested, because then we know for sure that it worked out for us. We know that it looks nice on someone of our size because that tester has posted photos. And we know that it's available in our size because someone who looks like us has made it. So that was one of the reasons why I decided I wanted to do this tee, because I could see that no one who fit into the plus sizes of the pattern had offered to test knit it. And I thought, well, it ticks a lot of boxes for me. It is a size inclusive knit. It's based on one of my favorite characters in literature. It's got a long timeline that gives me enough time to make it. And it's a pattern that I already have a good idea of what it looks like. I think I want to knit this. So that's why I decided to test knit this item. But in general, I don't test knit very often because it's not an experience that I enjoy. It could be very different for other knitters. I, in fact, know a lot of knitters who thrive on test knitting, and they specifically search out test knits as their main patterns that they knit. Great, I love that they do that because, as I mentioned, it's an awesome thing to do because it helps out everybody in the knitting community. And there's some of us who like to choose what we knit, and sometimes we like to have patterns that have already been tested and we already know work for us and our bodies. And now, time for this episode's book review. I am currently reading a Sarah Moss book, which, if you watched my last episode, you know that I am a huge fan of Sarah Moss. I absolutely love her books. I have read the Throne of Glass series and the Court of Thorns and Roses series, both of them at least twice all the way through. And Throne of Glass is 8 books long, so it's an endeavor to read the whole thing, but it is so fantastic. She is by far the best fantasy writer currently writing. I am just in awe of her talents. She's an incredible storyteller. She's an awesome dialogue writer, and she creates characters and worlds that are just so thought out, so detailed, so immersive that I am continually blown away by her writing. I absolutely love her books. And really, I've read all of them except one. And this is that one. I picked it up last year when I finished Throne of Glass for the second time. And I thought, okay, this is the time I'm gonna read Crescent City. And I just couldn't get into it at the time. I read the first chapter and I thought, I'm not hooked. I don't want to read it right now. So I just put it back on the shelf, and I thought to myself, there'll come a time where I want to read it and where I will get hooked by it right away. I will get into it. Now's just not the time. And at that time, now was not the time. But now is the time. So I'm reading Crescent City, which is the first book in the House of Earth and Blood series. Sorry, I had to look at that. As you can tell, it's a gorgeous cover. It is different from her other books. This one was written as an adult fantasy, so it's slightly darker and slightly more adult themed than her YA books, which is funny though, because the Throne of Glass series has a lot of violence for being a YA book. But this one I'm finding, I'm only about, let's see here. I'm only 160 pages in, so I'm very early into the book. There has been a bit of violence and gore, and there's a lot of swearing in this book, so if you're put off by that, you won't really like this book. I'm usually put off by excessive swearing in books. I'm not bothered by it in movies as much. It does still annoy me just because I don't think that it's... Okay, I don't mean to sound like a prude, but I don't like excessive swearing in movies and books because I feel like you're kicking a dead horse. It's just too much. You're lacking the purpose of using a swear word, which is to make an impact. If every other word is the F word, you're not making an impact anymore. You're just being annoying. So I've read books like that, The Magicians by Lev Grossman, that are like that, and I have significantly not enjoyed those books. And it just makes the book irritating to read if every second word is the F word, and it's not telling the story well. So This book has a smattering of swearing, but not a lot. But if you're put off by any swearing in a book, you might not enjoy this book. It is also mature themed. There is some sex. That's just what her books are like. I haven't gotten to any of those scenes yet, so I can't report on them. In her YA books, especially the Court of Thorns and Roses series, those scenes were chef's kiss. They were beautiful. But when I got to the most recent book in the Court series, which is Court of Silver Flames, I could not stand the sex scenes because they were just not well written. And it really annoyed me because I love her as an author. Her books are fantastic, but I just really hated how they were written because they were so bad. Anyway, that's a topic for another time. So yeah, I'm very early on into this book, but if it's going to be anything like Sarah Maas's other books, I'm probably going to enjoy it. So Crescent City is a story about a half-fae named Bryce whose best friend is murdered, and she is tasked with trying to find out who murdered her. And she has to team up with some people that she has never really interacted with before, and who it's sort of like that enemies to lovers kind of deal. So that's always a really fun trope to read. I love that trope. It's really fun. So I'm very early on into the story, so nothing of super interest has happened yet. This book is more about the characters than the plot, which is fine by me because that's what I gravitate towards in a book. I love reading stories about great characters. So can't tell you too much, just that this is what I'm reading now. I'm partway through. I'm hooked. I can't wait to see what happens next. So that's this episode's book review, which is Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. And if you've read any of her books, then you know we are all survivors of mass destruction. So that is it for episode 4 of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. Again, if you are a new viewer, thank you so much for watching my video, and if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. It really means a lot to me. I love interacting with you through my comments and through chatting with you on my Instagram. It just really warms my heart. So thank you so much for joining us, and nothing else to say except take care. Bye.